Hello, I'm live. It's working, I think. Actually, no, it isn't. The freaking light diffuser is my umbrella with some white fabric tied to it. It's putting a shadow on me, but I don't know. I feel sick. I look sick. I've just been shellacking my face. Oh, cool. I mean, I'm not going to start without her. I have to do the recap first, and it's a long and very dumb series of events until the general showed up, which we all like. We love to see it when the general shows up. Oh, I know what the shadow is. It's the shadow of my laptop on my face, which means I should move everything, but I'm not going to. The shadow is the mystery of vampires. Yeah, that didn't do anything. Right. So, no, that is something. I am haunted. I'm haunted. I'm haunted by all of the cool ghosts that, teenagers like. But I'm also haunted by my mother's voice in my head that says I really need to get my rubbish out and my recycling, and I shouldn't be online telling stories on the internet. I'll get the rubbish out, it's fine. There's only one open tub of custard that needs to go out. But yes, the diffuser is not doing all I would wish. What happens if I turn it around? I don't know, is that good light or is that horrible and frightening? Nothing's getting diffused. It's going right in my eyes. Thank you. It's probably too blue. The only thing I don't like about that we light is that it's got nothing to protect it from turning on in your handbag other than taking the batteries out. So try and get that going more better. It's not making a difference. It's fine. Okay. We've got John. We've got Alexander. We're waiting for Danny. And I'm going to do a recap probably at some point in this stream. I shouldn't have started it before I was ready. And just skip bits. Oh, you watched Saw 3. Saw 3 and 4 are the high points of the franchise. Yes. Yeah. It's the high points of the super dumb franchise. Yeah, it's great. It's so good. They were coming out, one per Halloween. So every Halloween a new Saw movie would come out, and it would do these retcon sequences that weren't really retcons. They were just like, oh, and also this other thing happened way back then. And I don't know, I think all of the scenes of the Saw mythos in order would make a very stupid but compelling YouTube video that I would probably watch because I'm an idiot. But yeah, if you imagine like me and a bunch of other idiots going to see the new Saw movie every Halloween for the twists and the plots and the double crossing and the betrayal and that guy was there all along and this is that. It was our soap opera for about 8 or 9 years. Yeah, watching them all back to back is a lot of fun. It's very stupid. I can't keep them all straight. And in the 5th one, maybe in the third and fourth ones too, there are like two detectives who look to me identical, which is very difficult. Actually, about three guys in that look identical to me, which doesn't help. My hair looks shitty. I've got an appointment on Friday. But yeah, I don't really watch the I don't watch it for the traps and the gore, although as far as practical effects go, it is really cool. Like if I were an effects person, I would want to watch them quite closely. Just, for the fun stuff they get to do. But actually, I'm a gross little baby, so I just look away. I don't want that. I don't want to. I mean, I want to see them a little bit, like the reverse bear trap, which, spoilers, but eventually we do see one go off. It's not very nice. I've been talking for 6 minutes and still haven't started the story or the recap. It's fine. We're talking about Saw. Alexander, have you seen Saw? Yeah. The yes, the jigsaw conceit of the jigsaw piece that he takes out of his victims is so dumb. It's such a, teenagers thought it was cool. No, they were films of a particular set of years, I think. Oh yeah, that makes sense. I love horror movies because actually I love them now that I'm an adult because you can watch a horror movie and be anxious and horrified and filled with a sense of dread because someone is making a movie and it's all fake as opposed to your everyday life when you're full of horror and anxiety and a sense of dread for no reason, or all the real reasons which don't go away at the end of 90-minute film. Danny, hi. I'm here too. We've been talking about the Saw movies. Very good. Very good. Bad movies. Yeah. Okay. Let's start the recap. What do I need to recap, really? Don't I should go back to the beginning? Okay, so from the beginning. There's this girl called Laura who lives with her dad, Mr. Laura, who is an idiot in a big old castle. Yeah, there is a theory that John Kramer is fucking Macaulay Culkin's character in Home Alone grown up. Kevin, what's his face? Doesn't fit with the timeline, but it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Laura and her dad are both massive idiots. They're probably inbred, and they live in a big old castle in Austria, in Styria, which I think at the time was in Austria. I don't know. And she's very lonely because apart from a million servants, she hasn't got any friends. So she's waiting on the visit from this young girl whose father is a general. But then there's a letter saying, my daughter died due to supernatural occurrences. Kevin McAllister, that's his name. So the general's like, my daughter died. I've gone mental. I'm a vampire hunter now. So the same day they get that letter, a mysterious young woman turns up called Carmilla, whose mother is like, hey, can you put my daughter up for 3 weeks? I need to go somewhere. Can't tell you where. And for the duration of the 3 weeks, my daughter will not tell you her surname or anything about her family. And the general, not the general, Laura's dad, who was an idiot, is like, that all sounds absolutely fine. So Laura and Carmilla basically fall in love, except Laura's kind of struggling with her feelings, and sometimes Carmilla turns into a big panther and goes into the village and kills all the hot girls in the village. So There's actually quite a lot going on there. But then Laura starts getting sick and having strange erotic dreams about Carmilla, which she tells to a male doctor who is probably scared of vampires but also wants to laugh. And he tells the father his conclusions, which the father is like, Laura, you don't need to know about this. You idiot. I'll tell you later. Carmilla, meanwhile, is very beautiful, very charming. She doesn't get up until 1 p.m. or later, and then she has a big cup of hot chocolate and nothing to eat, and walks around telling people religion is stupid. So she's a very relatable teen character, and implies that she was murdered at a ball 100 years ago. But Laura's very stupid, so she doesn't really click that anything's wrong. And Laura's dead mother sends her a ghostly vision saying there is danger, and shows her Carmilla covered with blood at the foot of Laura's bed, and Laura was like, oh my god, Carmilla's in trouble. Obviously the mother had the brains. There's a dent in my wall. Nope, sorry, it's a reflection from the umbrella. Sorry. Yeah. So close by their castle, there is a ruined castle and village where the Karnstein family lived. And I've been trying to say it, not Karnstein, but Karnstein. But because I'm a New Zealander, everything just sort of runs into each other and it just comes out Karnstein. So I'm sorry about that. So the Karnsteins were a family of rumored to be vampires. And at some point, the village kind of turned on them and everyone slaughtered the aristocrats and dug up their graves and put stakes through all the hearts. As you did back then, and as we, it has been mooted in our current society. And some of the old pictures from around Laura's house, from her mother's family, have just been cleaned. And oh my god, one of them looks exactly like Carmilla, down to the mole on her neck. Except it's like 100 years older, and it's Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Mircalla is an anagram of Carmilla. It's very embarrassing. And right, so just now the general has shown up. Yeah, we really should. I mean, that's what Bernie's promising, and that's why I'm throwing my full weight behind his campaign. Bernie Jacinda 2020. Let's do this. Let's get rid of the vampires. Let's preserve our wildlife for the werewolves, ideally. Yes. So Carmilla is not with Laura and her father. They're going over to the old ruined castle of the Karnstein family. Carmilla's not with them. I think she's asleep. I think they set out at dawn. And the general has arrived. Very exciting. He's going, oh, I actually have some business out that way. He's being very mysterious about it, but he's also kind of directly telling them that he wants to dig up some bodies and stake them in the heart and cut their heads off. But he is also a rich dude, so Laura's dad is fine with this. So he's been spending the whole carriage ride to the ruined village and castle of the Karnstein family. I'm just going to keep saying Karnstein. It's not going to stop. And the general's been telling them this story the whole way about how his daughter met a young lady at a masked ball whose name was hilariously Milaka. Another anagram of Carmilla, or Mircalla, if you take that as the original. And this young lady, yeah, well, the general is going, the young lady's mother kind of fast talked me, and I wasn't really thinking, and by the time I thought what a terrible idea it was to have Carmilla in my house, I had also realized how hot she was. And, so the general's quite a lot smarter than Laura's father, but he's still dumb enough to be like, well, what's the harm? Now, of course, he knows what the harm is. So he's been telling his story, and we've just gotten up to what's just happened. Oh, right. The general's looking for the tomb of Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Oh, yeah, totally. This movie is all about thinking with your dick. Laura is so in love with Carmilla. And Laura's dad is just high on being dumb, I think. And Carmilla's super into Laura. It's never really explained whether she genuinely loves Laura and the other unnamed young woman, or seems like she does. She's very intense. And, if so, that's all very sad. So they went and asked some filthy peasants if they knew where the tomb of Mircalla, Countess Karnstein is, and the very stupid, dumb peasants said, no, no one living knows that location, because it's full of vampires, obviously. The general's quite keen to find that tomb. So that basically, yes, right. Malaka, Carmilla, was not, she seemed kind of sick, kind of not well. The general has stopped telling his story to ask one of the peasants where the tomb is. The peasant says he doesn't know, and he goes away again to live a life of, squalor and brutality, being exploited by these idiots. And now we get up to chapter 14, the meeting, where the general resumes his story about his niece, who was his ward and also has no name. Laura went until like chapter 10 without being named by the author, so I'm pretty sure this girl will never get a name. Right, the meeting. My beloved child, he resumed, was now growing rapidly worse. The physician who attended her had failed to produce the slightest impression on her disease, for such I then supposed it to be. He saw my alarm and suggested a consultation. I called in an abler physician from Graz. Just turn this on its side. Oh, it's the light from the phone. I don't know where I get the courage to complain that other people are stupid. Several days elapsed before he arrived. He was a good and pious, as well as a learned man. Having seen my poor ward together, they withdrew to my library to confer and discuss. I, from the adjoining room where I waited their summons, heard these two gentlemen's voices raised something sharper than a strictly philosophical discussion. I knocked at the door and entered. I found the old physician from Graz maintaining his theory. His rival was combating it with undisguised ridicule, accompanied with bursts of laughter. This unseemly manifestation subsided, and the altercation ended on my entrance. Sir, said the first physician, my learned brother seems to think that you want a conjurer, not a doctor. Pardon me, said the old physician from Graz, looking displeased. I shall state my own view of the case in my own way another time. I grieve, Monsieur le Général, that my skill in science I can be of no use. Before I go, I shall do myself the honour to suggest something to you. He seemed thoughtful and sat down at a table and began to write. Profoundly disappointed, I made my bow, and as I turned to go, the other doctor pointed over his shoulder to his companion who was writing, and then, with a shrug, significantly touched his forehead. This consultation then left me precisely where I was. I walked out into the grounds, all but distracted. The doctor from Graz, in 10 or 15 minutes, overtook me. He apologized for having followed me, but said that he could not conscientiously take his leave without a few words more. He told me that he could not be mistaken. No natural disease exhibited the same symptoms, and that death was already very near. There remained, however, a day, possibly two, of life. If the fatal seizure were at once arrested, with great care and skill her strength might possibly return, but all hung now upon the confines of the irrevocable. One more assault might extinguish that last spark of vitality which is, every moment, ready to die. And what is the nature of the seizure you speak of? I entreated. I have stated all fully in this note, which I place in your hands upon the distinct condition that you send for the nearest clergyman, and open my letter in his presence, and on no account read it till he is with you. You would despise it else, and it is a matter of life and death. Should the priest fail you, then, indeed, you may read it. He asked me, before taking his leave, finally, whether I would wish to see a man curiously learned upon the very subject, which, after I had read his letter, would probably interest me above all others, and he urged me earnestly to invite him to visit him there, and so took his leave. The ecclesiastic was absent, and I read the letter by myself. At another time, or in another case, it might have excited my ridicule. But into what quackeries will not people rush for a last chance, where all accustomed means have failed, and the life of a beloved object is at stake? Nothing, you will say, could be more absurd than the learned man's letter. It was monstrous enough to have consigned him to a madhouse. He said that the patient was suffering from the visits of a vampire. The punctures which she described as having occurred near the throat were, he insisted, the insertion of those two long, thin, and sharp teeth which, it is well known, are peculiar to vampires. And there could be no doubt, he added, as to the well-defined presence of the small livid mark, which all but concurred in describing as that induced by the demon's lips, and every symptom described by the sufferer was in exact conformity with those recorded in every case of a similar visitation. Oh, I get it now, the weird blue mark on Laura's neck. That's a hickey. It's the mark of the vampire, sucking on the neck. That was worrying me because I was thinking of like a mole, but blue. I wasn't sure what that was about. It was such a teenage thing to do. Being myself wholly skeptical as to the existence of any such portent as the vampire, the supernatural theory of the good doctor furnished, in my opinion, but another instance of learning and intelligence oddly associated with some one hallucination. I was so miserable, however, that rather than try nothing, I acted upon the instructions of the letter. I concealed myself in the dark dressing room that opened upon the poor patient's room in which a candle was burning, and watched there until she was fast asleep. I stood at the door, peeping through the small crevice, my sword laid on the table beside me as my directions prescribed, until a little after 1, I saw a large black object, very ill-defined, crawl, as it seemed to me, over the foot of the bed, and swiftly spread itself up to the poor girl's throat, where it swelled in a moment into a great palpitating mass. Yeah. I don't think that's the panther. I think that's some kind of M.R. James shit. This is... Ooh. For a few moments I had stood petrified. I now sprang forward with my sword in my hand. The black creature suddenly contracted towards the foot of the bed, glided over it, and, standing on the floor about a yard below the foot of the bed, with a glare of skulking ferocity and horror fixed on me, I saw Malacca. Speculating, I know not what, I struck at her instantly with my sword, but I saw her standing near the door unscathed. Horrified, I pursued and struck again. She was gone, and my sword flew to shivers against the door. I can't describe to you all that passed on that horrible night. The whole house was up and stirring. The spectre Malacca was gone, but her victim was sinking fast, and before the morning dawned she died. The old general was agitated. Laura is such a detective. We did not speak to him. My father walked to some little distance and began reading the inscriptions on the tombstones, and thus occupied, he strolled into the door of a side chapel to prosecute his researches. The general leaned against the wall, dried his eyes, and sighed heavily. I was relieved on hearing the voices of Carmilla and Madame, who were at that moment approaching. The voices died away. Laura! Laura, you heard that whole story, and you're excited to hear that Carmilla is coming to join the party. Oh, I'm so glad Carmilla's safe. That story was so scary. I'm sorry. This is not fair of me to criticize Laura because she is probably desperately inbred. Oh, she's such yeah. She is peak lesbian dumbass. Actually, yeah, I've been that dumb for a person before, so it's not just lesbians. We can all go a little bit, become a little bit of a giant fucking weeping idiot about people who are just not good. Oh, but come on, Laura. In this solitude, having just listened to so strange a story, connected as it was with the great entitled dead whose monuments were mouldering among the dust and ivy around us, and every incident of which bore so awfully upon my own mysterious case. In this haunted spot, darkened by the towering foliage that rose on every side, dense and high above its noiseless walls, a horror began to steal over me, and my heart sank as I thought that my friends were, after all, not about to enter and disturb this triste and ominous scene. The old general's eyes were fixed on the ground as he leaned with his hand upon the basement of a shattered monument. I think there's a bit of both. Yeah, you can be a bit of both. Although lesbians are objectively less stupid because women are very beautiful, so getting dumb over them is less stupid than getting dumb over some dude who I don't want to get into it. But yeah, it makes a lot more sense to get dumb over a pretty lady. Under a narrow arched doorway, surmounted by one of those demoniacal grotesques in which the cynical and ghastly fancy of old Gothic carving delights, I saw very gladly the beautiful face and figure of Carmilla enter the shadowy chapel. I was just about to rise and speak, and nodded smiling in answer to her peculiarly engaging smile, when with a cry the old man by my side caught up the woodman's hatchet and started forward. On seeing him, a brutalized change came over her features. It was an instantaneous and horrible transformation as she made a crouching step backwards. Before I could utter a scream, he struck at her with all his force, but she dived under his blow and, unscathed, caught him in her tiny grasp by the wrist. He struggled for a moment to release his arm, but his hand opened, the axe fell to the ground, and the girl was gone. He staggered against the wall. His grey hair stood upon his head, and a moisture shone over his face as if he were at the point of death. The frightful scene had passed in a moment. The first thing I recollect after is Madame standing before me, and impatiently repeating again and again the question, "Where is Mademoiselle Carmilla?" I answered at length, "I don't know. I can't tell. She went there," and I pointed to the door through which Madame had just entered, "only a minute or two since. But I have been standing there in the passage ever since Mademoiselle Carmilla entered, and she did not return." She then began to call Carmilla through every door and passage to and from the windows, but no answer came. "She called herself Carmilla?" asked the general, still agitated. Still agitated? Geez, General. "Carmilla, yes," I answered. "Aye," he said, "that is Millarca. That is the same person who long ago was called Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Depart from this accursed ground, my poor child, as quickly as you can. Drive to the clergyman's house, and stay there till we come. Begone! May you never behold Carmilla more. You will not find her here." And I don't know if that was supposed to be an extremely shocking twist. Maybe there was an initial draft of this where Lefanu just kind of thought, "Hey, you guys can put it together, right?" And his editor was like, "Who the hell are all these women?" So he had to put in that one paragraph. We just don't know. We don't know. It's lost knowledge. Chapter 15, Ordeal and Execution. Oh, we might wrap this one up today. Never know. As he spoke, one of the strangest-looking men I ever beheld entered the chapel at the door through which Carmilla had made her entrance and her exit. He was tall, narrow-chested, stooping, with high shoulders, and dressed in black. His face was brown and dried in with deep furrows. He wore an oddly shaped hat with a broad leaf. His hair, long and grizzled, hung on his shoulders. He wore a pair of gold spectacles and walked slowly with an odd, shambling gait, with his face sometimes turned up to the sky and sometimes bowed down towards the ground, seemed to wear a perpetual smile. His long, thin arms were swinging, and his lank hands, in old black gloves ever so much too wide for them, waving and gesticulating in utter abstraction. Who's this guy? Yeah, anagrams. I mean, it's not terrible for the time. Maybe everyone's minds were kind of blown. The very man, exclaimed the general, advancing with manifest delight. My dear Baron, how happy I am to see you. I had no hope of meeting you so soon. He signed to my father, who had by this time returned. During that tiny fight where the general tries to cut Carmilla's head off with an axe, and she just fucking matrix dives out of the way. Laura's dad was in the church reading inscriptions. He doesn't know anything happened. I'm sorry, that's just kind of great to me. He signed to my father, who had by this time returned, and leading the fantastic old gentleman, whom he called the Baron, to meet him. He introduced him formally, and they at once entered into earnest conversation. The stranger took a roll of paper from his pocket and spread it on the worn surface of a tomb that stood by. He had a pencil case in his fingers, with which he traced imaginary lines from point to point on the paper, which, from their often glancing at it together at certain points of the building, I concluded to be a plan of the chapel. He accompanied what I may term his lecture with occasional readings from a dirty yellow little book whose yellow leaves were closely written over. They sauntered together down the side aisle, opposite to the point where I was standing, conversing as they went. They then began measuring distances by paces, and finally they all stood together, facing a piece of the side wall, which they began to examine with great minuteness, pulling off the ivy that clung over it, and rapping the plaster with the ends of their sticks, scraping here and knocking there. At length they ascertained the existence of a broad marble tablet, with letters carved in relief upon it. Have a little sip while you try and figure out what that is. Did you manage? With the assistance of the woodman, who soon returned, a monumental inscription and carved escutcheon were disclosed. They proved to be those of the long-lost monument of Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. With this, no. The old general, though not, I fear, given to the praying mood, raised his hands and eyes to heaven in mute thanksgiving for some moments. Tomorrow, I heard him say, the commissioner will be here, and the inquisition will be held according to law. Then turning to the old man with the gold spectacles, whom I have described, he shook him warmly by both hands and said, Baron, how can I thank you? How can we all thank you? You will have delivered this region from a plague that has scourged its inhabitants for more than a century. The horrible enemy, thank God, is at last tracked. Don't thank him yet. You're scheduling this for tomorrow? My father led the stranger aside, and the general followed. I know that he had led them out of hearing, that he might relate my case, and I saw them glance often quickly at me as the discussion proceeded. That's right, Laura. Your stuff, none of your business. The men have it. My father came to me, kissed me again and again, and leading me from the chapel, said, It is time to return, but before we go home we must add to our party the good priest, who lives but a little way from this, and persuade him to accompany us to the Schloss. In this quest we were successful, and I was glad, being unspeakably fatigued when we reached home. but my satisfaction was changed to dismay on discovering that there were no tidings of Carmilla. Of the scene that had occurred in the ruined chapel, no explanation was offered to me, and it was clear that it was a secret which my father, for the present, determined to keep from me. What the fuck, Laura? It's not a secret. You heard everything. She heard everything, and the general said, that girl, Carmilla, is the Malaka who stayed with me and killed my daughter, and Mircalla, Countess Carnston, who was a vampire. You know everything, Laura. It's not a secret. Sorry, I just needed to take that moment. The sinister absence of Carmilla made the remembrance of the scene more horrible to me. The arrangements for the night were singular. 2 servants and Madame were to sit up in my room that night, and the ecclesiastic with my father kept watch in the adjoining dressing room. I know, she's such a dummy. I get the rose-colored glasses thing, but she's got rose-tinted, earplugs as well. It would be one thing if Laura was paying attention and was like, oh, they said Carmilla was a vampire, but I didn't believe them because I'm super in love with her, or I did believe them because I'm super in love with her. We're going to be vampires together and we're going to kill all these people and institute democracy in 19th century Austria. And we're going to stop World War II together, World War One, sorry, which will in turn stop World War II together. And we are going to forge a wonderful vampiric European socialism country, which would be wonderful. But no. Oh my God. The priest had performed certain solemn rites that night, the purport of which I did not understand any more than I comprehended the reason of this extraordinary precaution taken for my safety during sleep. I saw it all clearly a few days later. It took her a few days to figure out what was going on. Anarcho vampirism, exactly. Bernie Jacinto 2020. Oh my God. I mean, at this point, I saw it all clearly a few days later. The disappearance of Carmilla was followed by the discontinuance of my nightly sufferings. You have heard, no doubt, of the appalling superstition that prevails in Upper and Lower Styria, in Moravia, Silesia, and Turkish Serbia, in Poland, even in Russia. The superstition, so we must call it, of the vampire. You think, Laura? I know. Laura's not good enough for Carmilla, okay? She is a true blue dummy. I wish Carmilla all the happiness in the world with, a girl who isn't quite as much of a doofus. If human testimony, taken with every care and solemnity, judicially, before commissions innumerable, each consisting of many members, all chosen for integrity and intelligence, and constituting reports more voluminous, perhaps, than exist upon any one other class of cases, is worth anything, it is difficult to deny, or even to doubt the existence of such a phenomenon as the vampire. For my part, I have heard no theory by which to explain what I myself have witnessed and experienced, other than that supplied by the ancient and well-attested belief of the country. The next day, the formal proceedings took place in the chapel of Carnston. The grave of the Countess Mircalla was opened, and the general and my father recognized each his perfidious and beautiful guest in the face now disclosed to view. The features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open, no cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. The 2 medical men, one officially present, the other on the part of the promoter of the inquiry, attested to the marvellous fact that there was a faint but appreciable respiration and a corresponding action of the heart. The limbs were perfectly flexible, the flesh elastic, and the leaden coffin floated with blood, in which to a depth of 7 inches the body lay immersed. Here, then, were all the admitted signs and proofs of vampirism. The body, therefore, in accordance with the ancient practice, was raised, and a sharp stake driven through the heart of the vampire, who uttered a piercing shriek at the moment, in all respects such as might escape from a living person in the last agony. Then the head was struck off, and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck. The body and head was next placed on a pile of wood and reduced to ashes, which were thrown upon the river and borne away, and that territory has never since been plagued by the visits of a vampire. My father has a copy of the report of the Imperial Commission, with the signatures of all who were present at these proceedings attached in verification of the statement. It is from this official paper that I have summarized my account of the last shocking scene. Wow, Laura didn't even get to be there at the, judicial execution of her girlfriend, which is why women's suffrage has been so important. I thought there was going to be way more to go than that. Wow. Laura finally clicked what was going on. Bang, bang, boom, killed the vampire. Chapter 16, Conclusion. I write all this, you may suppose, with composure, but far from it. I cannot think of it without agitation. Nothing but your earnest desire, so repeatedly expressed, could have induced me to sit down to a task that has unstrung my nerves for months to come, and reintroduced a shadow of the unspeakable horror which years after my deliverance continued to make my days and nights dreadful, and solitude insupportably terrific. Let me add a word or two about that quaint Baron Vordenburg, to whose curious lore we were indebted for the discovery of the Countess Mircalla's grave. He had taken up his abode in Graz, where, living upon a mere pittance, which was all that remained to him of the one princely estates of his family in Upper Styria, he devoted himself to the minute and laborious investigation of the marvellously authenticated tradition of vampirism. He had at his fingers' ends all the great and little works upon the subject. Magia Posthuma, Phlegon de Mirabilibus, Augustinus de Cura Pro Mortuis, Philosophicae et Christianae Cogitationes de Vampiris, by John Christopher Herrenberg. Thank you to my Latin teacher, and 1,000 others, among which I remember only a few of those which he lent to my father. He had a voluminous digest of all the judicial cases, from which he had extracted a system of principles that appear to govern, some always and others occasionally only, the condition of the vampire. I may mention in passing that the deadly pallor attributed to that sort of revenants is a mere melodramatic fiction. They present in the grave, and when they show themselves in human society, the appearance of healthy life. When disclosed to light in their coffins, they exhibit all the symptoms that are enumerated as those which prove the vampire life of the long-dead Countess Karnstein. How they escape from their graves and return to them for certain hours every day, without displacing the clay or leaving any trace of disturbance in the state of the coffin or the cerements, has always been admitted to be utterly inexplicable. The amphibious existence of the vampire is sustained by daily renewed slumber in the grave. Its horrible lust for living blood supplies the vigor of its waking existence. The vampire is prone to be fascinated with an engrossing vehemence, resembling the passion of love by particular persons. In pursuit of these, it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagem, for access to a particular object may be obstructed in 100 ways. It will never desist until it has satiated its passion and drained the very life of its coveted victim. But it will, in these cases, husband and protract its murderous enjoyment with the refinement of an epicure and heighten it by the gradual approaches of an artful courtship. In these cases, it seems to yearn for something like sympathy and consent. In ordinary ones, it goes direct to its subject, overpowers with violence, and strangles and exhausts, often at a single feast. The vampire is apparently subject, in certain situations, to special conditions. In the particular instance of which I have given you a relation, Mircalla seemed to be limited to a name which, if not her real one, should at least reproduce, without the omission or addition of a single letter, those, as we say, anagrammatically, which compose it. Carmilla did this, so did Malacca. I mean, how do we know that the vampire isn't really in love with these people? Special vampire love, apart from the hot peasant girls in the village, which obviously are just food. It's troubling. I mean, it's problematic, honestly. I don't have the academic background or brain words to explain why it's problematic or to fix the problems inherent in vampirism. But hopefully Bernie will. My father related to the Baron Vordenberg, who remained with us for 2 or 3 weeks after the expulsion of Carmilla, the story about the Moravian nobleman and the vampire at Carnston churchyard. And then he asked the Baron how he had discovered the exact position of the long-concealed tomb of the Countess Mircalla. The Baron's grotesque features puckered into a mysterious smile. He looked down, still smiling on his worn spectacle case, and fumbled with it. Yes, it is sad. Gingers do have souls, they're just bad ones. Can't believe you're having... I have many journals and other papers written by that remarkable man, the Moravian guy who killed the other vampire. The most curious among them is one treating of the visit of which you speak to Carnston. The tradition, of course, discolours and distorts a little. He might have been termed Moravian nobleman, for he had changed his abode to that territory and was, beside, a noble, but he was, in truth, a native of Upper Styria. It is enough to say that in very early youth he had been a passionate and favoured lover of the beautiful Mircalla, Countess Carnston. Her early death plunged him into inconsolable grief. It is the nature of vampires to increase and multiply, but according to an ascertained and ghostly law. Assume at starting a territory perfectly free from that pest. How does it begin, and how does it multiply itself? I will tell you. A person, more or less wicked, puts an end to himself. A suicide, under certain circumstances, becomes a vampire. That spectre visits living people in their slumbers. They die, and almost invariably, in the grave, develop into vampires. This happened in the case of the beautiful Mircalla, who was haunted by one of those demons. My ancestor, Vordenberg, whose title I still bear, soon discovered this, and in the course of the studies to which he devoted himself, learned a great deal more. Just want to take a moment here to talk about a little bit of vampire folklore that's based in real life. And it's not about suicides and the superstitions around them, because we all know about that. But there is a thing which is pretty much neglected in modern vampire stories about how a vampire's preferred targets are usually its family and friends, which has its origins in infectious disease. We didn't actually know about viruses and germs and how disease spreads before. I mean, it was like mid-19th century. It was very late in human experience. We kind of thought disease might be tied to bad smells, which of course often happen around things that can spread disease, like corpses left out in the open, and using the river you drink from as a toilet. That's not a good idea. So when a person gets sick, maybe they go to market, they pick up an illness from another village, they bring it back to their own village, they get sick very quickly and die, and members of their family start dropping like flies as well. And that's where the vampire legend kind of gets that from. It's a really interesting case in, I think it's like 1880s or 1890s, America, Rhode Island, I think. The case of Mercy Brown, who died of consumption, and members of her family started dying also, and they actually dug her up, burned her, or burned her heart or something, and made her very sick brother drink it. Amazingly, this didn't work, and he died. So, yeah, Mercy Brown, I think it was Rhode Island, late 19th century, shockingly late in the 19th century. You can look it up. It's very interesting. But yeah, it's very cool. The origins of vampire legends are actually fascinating. I mean, a lot of the, what is supposed to happen when you dig up a vampire and open the coffin lid, a lot of that is what actually happens to a body that's decomposing. Yeah, the way suicides cluster. That is absolutely. It's like a mental infection, kind of. But yeah, you could attribute that to a vampire as well. It's very hard to figure out what causes these things. And if vampire is what makes sense, then you're kind of going to go with that. So infection is a big one. Suicide clusters, obviously. And yeah, when you dig up a grave, sometimes the body will have swollen with gases, and fluids might be pushed out of the nose or mouth. So I'm sorry, it's gross, but so when you dig up the grave of a supposed vampire, they might have the experience of looking plump and healthy and having foaming blood around the mouth. And that's just the process of decomposition. But if you're looking for a blood-sucking nightmare fiend, and that's what you find when you open the coffin, you're going to draw certain conclusions from that. So, yes, hello, Meredy. Vampire does always make sense. That's true. Oh, I should finish the story. Shit. But yeah, the whole sort of biological origin of vampire myths is fascinating. Very, very interesting stuff. Yes, absolutely. I personally do not want to be buried. I want to be dressed in natural fibers such as cotton, wool, and silk, and put in a big glass box and filmed constantly. And then you can bring all the school children to come and see, and they'll see how a body decomposes. And it'll be fascinating. We can document it, and the kids can come in, they can have a look, we can see how leather shoes maybe deteriorate. It's going to be really good for science, and also in case I'm still alive. So that's my stated will, and my sister has already agreed to absolutely not pay any attention to it, which I think is a bit mean. It doesn't have to be in a museum, it could be in the woods, scare some people. Right, okay. Yes, yeah, there are some books which I cannot think of the titles or the authors, but yeah, vampire myths have been studied from a biological perspective, and it's very, very interesting. Really interesting intersection with cultural depictions of death, revenants, disease, especially, and how disease spreads. Oh, I don't know. That's for the boffins to figure out, and also to keep me alive. Another really interesting thing that people used to do is I'm not sure how widespread this was, but it was in Germany in the, I want to say 1700s, could be 1600s. They believed that the vampires were just chewing down there. They would chew their own fingers off. So some people suspected to be vampires, suicides and the like, were buried with a brick between their teeth, so they could just chew on that down there, which makes sense, kind of. I read all of this in a book, and I cannot think of the name or the author. But if I ever do, I'll put it in the comments to this video. And if you know the answer and you're watching in the future or whatever, please put the name in the comments. It's very interesting stuff. It would. It'll be great. Yeah, chewing on bricks. Just going to finish the story now, which is why we're actually here, I think. Right, my ancestor Vordenberg, whose title I bear, soon discovered this, that Mircalla was haunted by a vampire who killed her, and now she became a vampire. And in the course of studies to which he devoted himself, learned a great deal more. Among other things, he concluded that suspicion of vampirism would probably fall, sooner or later, upon the dead countess, who in life had been his idol. He conceived a horror, be she what she might, of her remains being profaned by the outrage of a posthumous execution. He has left a curious paper to prove that the vampire, on its expulsion from its amphibious existence, is projected into a far more horrible life, and he resolved to save his once beloved Mircalla from this. He adopted the stratagem of a journey here, a pretended removal of her remains, and a real obliteration of her monument. When age had stolen upon him, and from the veil of years he looked back on the scenes he was leaving, he considered in a different spirit what he had done, and a horror took possession of him. He made the tracings and notes which had guided me to the very spot, and drew up a confession of the deception that he had practiced. If he had intended any further action in this matter, death prevented him, and the hand of a remote descendant has, too late for many, directed the pursuit to the lair of the beast. We talked a little more, and among other things he said was this. One sign of the vampire is the power of the hand. The slender hand of Mircalla closed like a vice of steel on the general's wrist when he raised the hatchet to strike. But its power is not confined to its grasp. It leaves a numbness in the limb it seizes, which is slowly, if ever, recovered from. The following spring, my father took me on a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year. It was long before the terror of recent events subsided, and to this hour the image of Carmilla returns to memory with ambiguous alternations. Sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the writhing fiend I saw in the ruined church. And often from a reverie I have started, fancying I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing room door. The end. Kind of an ambiguous ending. Yeah, exactly. And, having a numbness in a limb that never goes away, I mean, a lot of things can cause that. She does. She misses her. And at the beginning it said the lady is dead now, so, maybe Laura's a vampire. We don't know. But yeah, there was a lot going on in that book. It felt like the exposition dump was maybe put in, after a first draft that was a little more subtle. Oh no, I'm pretty sure they took care of the peasant girls. Yeah, without even mentioning it. Or maybe peasant girls don't actually become vampires. Maybe it's just important people. No, I'm pretty sure from what the peasant woodcutter said, that the superstition was still pretty much alive. So I'm guessing that the village took care of their own. But again, I don't know. I'm not a literary scholar. I'm not any kind of scholar. Yeah, that was Carmilla. We're finished. That's crazy. What do we do next? More vampires? More ghosts? Might do a couple of Emma James stories before I commit to anything like long. Yeah, I'm a Twitter scholar. Sometimes, in real universities, you have to look in a book and write down which page you found an idea on. But all I have to do is look into my heart and tell you what I believe to be true in that moment, which I think is more profound. Yeah, we're all pretty much sluts with vampires. Dracula's kind of obvious. Oh, absolutely. Meredy, the other videos are still up. So you can watch them and hear the weird rambling asides. It's like an audiobook that's kind of, there's just absolutely no editing or control. Yeah, yeah. I don't know about Dracula because everyone's kind of done it. Not sure about the vampire, Polidori's one about Lord Byron, because I haven't actually read it, so I don't know. Um, but yes, I might read a couple of Emma James stories in the middle. It's an interactive audiobook. Yeah, exactly. You can interrupt with things, and I can tell you some pretty gross facts about dead bodies and why that makes people believe in vampires, and maybe my own certain ideas about revenants that I've been having that could be very cool and interesting. But yes, thank you everybody who was here live for any of the sessions. Thank you everybody who's watched any part of these videos. It's been really fun. And I'll do a few short stories and then crack into something bigger. It might be Dracula. It might be time. We're busy. We don't have time to read Dracula, but I can read it to you. So my hair looks fucking awful. So sorry. You all deserve so much better than this hair. Thank you all very much. And I will see you tomorrow. Maybe. I am not doing Moby Dick. I won't be able to do it without laughing. I can't do Moby Dick. I'll be just giggling like a 12-year-old for like 1,000 hours. It's not going to work. But yeah, thank you all. Going to end the stream here, and I hope I remember the name of that book. Goodbye, Carmilla. We barely knew you.